Hi, my name is State Senator Ed Kennedy, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Beacon Hill Buzz. And I'm happy to have as my guest today the Massachusetts State Auditor, Suzanne Bump.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Could you share a little bit about your background and experience prior to becoming the State Auditor?
I have spent really all of my professional life in and around state government. Right out of college, I was an intern at the State House, which turned into a legislative aide position for a state representative from Braintree. She retired. I ran successfully for her seat. I held that position for 8 years. I went to law school during that period of time. I practiced law. I did some lobbying, stayed active in politics throughout all of those years. Came back into government with Deval Patrick. I was the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development, which meant that I oversaw 6 state agencies, including unemployment insurance and industrial accidents and occupational health and safety, with 1,500 employees. And as much as I loved that job, and I really did, and I worked closely, for instance, with the Lowell Workforce Investment Board, the Merrimack Valley Workforce Investment Board. I loved that job. But I saw the opportunity in the auditor's office in 2010 when there was, when the incumbent, Joe DiNucci, was retiring.
When people think of the Office of State Auditor, most assume that you do financial auditing of individuals, which is not the case.
No.
Instead, you do something called performance auditing. Can you tell us what performance auditing is?
Sure. Performance auditing, as distinct from financial auditing, means that we aren't just looking at how much money was allocated to a state program and whether they could account for all the money or all of the resources. We do care about that, but we go beyond that into this area called performance auditing. There are 2 elements to that. One is that we look to see that the money was spent in accordance with the law, with the rules.
Right.
There are rules about how you spend money in state government. Who's eligible for what services, proper contracting for major providers of government services, whether it's a human services agency or it's a road builder. So we want to see that agencies are following the rules. But then we also want to look at whether they are working effectively and efficiently. It's one thing to spend money, but you want to see it well spent. So is there a better way to conduct a particular activity? How can an agency improve the services that it provides to its constituents, whether they are kids in foster care or they are victims of sexual abuse, and we're trying to track sex offenders and the like. The question we're asking is, how well are you doing the job? How well are you spending that money? How well are you serving the taxpayers?
And could you give us some examples of performance audits that your office has conducted?
Well, I mentioned foster care, so why don't I talk about that?
Sure.
We've done over the course of my tenure a couple of audits of the Department of Children and Families. And in one of the audits, and frankly I think this is the most impactful audit that we've done during my tenure and possibly even longer, and it didn't involve money. This was about how well kids in state custody, kids who have been removed from their families because of abuse or neglect, and they're now being taken care of by the state, how well the state is ensuring their continued health and safety. And from past audits, we knew that kids were not getting the regular physical checkups that the law requires. But this time we took it a little further and wanted to know if there was a way that social workers could be better informed about the continuing health and safety of kids. When you're in foster care, you whether you're in a group home or you've been placed with a family, those children get their care through the state's Medicaid program. And so our question was, are the social workers at the Department of Children and Families aware of all of the medical treatment that the kids that they're overseeing are getting through the Mass Health program? Again, it's what's the data that we can bring together to make sure that these kids are healthy and safe. And what we found was they weren't getting that information, and we found that social workers were unaware of literally hundreds of medical treatments that kids had received. And I'm not talking about a foster kid who fell off a bike and scraped his knee. I'm talking about kids in state custody who have been raped, who have been stabbed or poisoned or shot or were inflicting abuse on themselves, cutting and the like, or had attempted suicide. And we found a number of other deficiencies in the department's identification of sexual abuse, and they're referring cases to district attorneys for prosecution. And so that audit looked, as I said, not at the money, but it looked at how well social workers were able to get the information they needed to keep kids safe. And so they now have medical social workers who are getting access to that data, and so they know when a child in state care has seen a doctor. They know if this child is in danger and should be removed from the placement that they have been given. So I mean, that's a performance audit.
Okay.
And it, as I said, it's not about the money. It was about helping ensure the kids in state custody were healthy and safe.
Do you find that there are recurring issues in the performance audits, or is each one a little bit unique and different?
Well, just as every program in state government differs from one another, I mean, so if we think of all the programs even within an agency. At the Department of Public Health, they have smoking cessation and maternal health and child health, and they would have been doing COVID vaccinations and the like. And so you can imagine each one of those programs presents a unique set of risks as we look at them, just ways that things could go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so that said, while there's often a great deal of difference, unfortunately, there are also often common things, like the agencies simply haven't thought through all of the way their programs could go wrong and haven't designed what we refer to as controls. What are the steps that you need to take in order to prevent something from going wrong, and then how do you recover from a mishap in an agency? And I think a lot of it's not due to stupidity, and it's not due to indifference. A lot of times it has to do with resources. They don't have the staff, they don't have the current technology, and so those are common findings in our audits. And the legislature often has come to the rescue in the face of these audits, and they've added more staff to programs. So it's it's a way, even when you have a really seems like elemental issue like that, there are solutions.
Okay. Within your office, you have the Division of Local Mandates, and which does significant work at the local level. Can you tell us what exactly they do?
Well, as you well know from your time in city government, the state passes laws, and the administration, the governor's administration will hand down new requirements for cities and towns. Don't do it this way, now do it that way. You're serving this population, serve these people too. And you know how infrequently it's fully funded by the legislature. And so the Division of Local Mandates sits apart. It's one of my other units. It's not part of the audit function, but it sits apart, and it reviews petitions from cities and towns for determinations as to who should pay for this mandate. It's this new thing that the city or town has to do. And there are legal standards, that some of which are in the law and some have been decided through court cases. And so there's an analysis that my office does, and we render a decision, which means that the community can decide not to follow the law, or what typically happens is we render the decision and then the legislature comes through. A recent example was the expansion of voting during COVID. During the pandemic,
Right.
Cities and towns were not just allowed, but they were encouraged to open polling places for several days in advance of the election to prevent crowding in the polling places. That costs money, because you have to rent the machines and the equipment. You've got to pay for staff, and so that's just one of the costs that had to be incurred with extended voting hours and with mail-in ballots. And so communities came to us and we said, yeah, there are certain things that you have to cover, but there are certain things that the legislature should cover. I think for the city of Lowell, expanded voting meant maybe $50,000 more for the election officials in the city of Lowell. We also do reports that on municipal spending that's required by the state that doesn't require reimbursement, but it really represents excessive costs for municipalities. So an example is regional school transportation, and we've examined the costs that aren't getting, the extent to which the state is not reimbursing for something that they are supposed to be paying for. We did a report recently that the legislature, 2 years ago, that the legislature took up and incorporated ultimately in the criminal justice reform bill. We were looking at the cost of municipal police training. The state does provide for some of that training, but mostly it's cities and towns, and not all police officers were getting all the training that the law requires them to get, because the towns couldn't afford to send the
Right.
officers. And so we did that report. Shortly thereafter, there was the death of George Floyd in a case of excessive police violence, and you took up the criminal justice reform bill, and we had recommended in our report police accountability in the form of police officer standards and training, and that was a recommendation in our report, and you enacted that into law.
Your office also works to identify fraud in public benefit programs through the Bureau of Special Investigations.
Right.
Can you talk about that too?
We, you know, that there are a number of programs in the state that are designed to provide access to services in health care, or basic services, just income supports. So through the Department of Transitional Assistance and through the Medicaid program, the Mass Health program, for example, or even child care vouchers through the Department of Early Education and Care. There are people who misrepresent their income eligibility or their residency in order to qualify for these benefits. And we work with the agencies that give out the benefits, that make decisions on benefits and the levels and the like, and who do ongoing monitoring to ensure that people are continuing to be eligible. And whenever they feel that an investigation is warranted into a person's continuing eligibility, they refer that case to our Bureau of Special Investigations. So we look at whether an individual is committing public benefits fraud. Mostly we work on the basis of those referrals, but because of the data analytic capabilities that we have, we can also do some of our own identification of possible patterns of benefits usage that suggests fraud, and we so through both of those means we identify fraud. 8 people are forced to pay back. Sometimes they get criminally charged for the fraud. They get disqualified from future benefits and the like. And so it's about ensuring integrity in these programs. We need people to have confidence in these programs.
During this session, I filed 2 pieces of legislation that are similar to the legislation that exists for school building funds, the school building authorities. And the bills, which would be, one of them was to create a public safety building authority that would be for police and fire stations. Senator Walter Timothy's filed a similar bill, and I think both those bills are still in committee, which are chaired by him. So I'm expecting a favorable outcome for those, or at least for his, maybe not for mine. We'll see.
Oh, it'll go along for the ride.
Right. But I filed another bill that would be more inclusive, that would include not just public safety buildings, but also libraries and town halls and all kinds of municipal buildings.
Right.
And I was happy to find out after I had filed the bill that your office did a report, I think last fall, that recommended something similar to that. Can you discuss that? I think it's a bigger issue. I think it's an issue for all 351 communities.
Right.
But I think it's a real big issue out in Western Mass, where you have, small communities and hamlets that really just don't have the wherewithal to be able to afford to build those things, or even to repair them on their own.
Right. In our report, we were looking particularly. This was a Division of Local Mandates report.
Mm-hmm.
We were looking at what I see as a legitimate east-west divide. Eastern Massachusetts and Western Massachusetts do not resemble one another. I lived most of my life in Eastern Mass, but there were almost 20 years that I was in the Berkshires.
Okay.
And so I was made aware of that east-west divide every time I traveled the end of the state. And we were looking at how some of the formulas, and we started out looking particularly at transportation and the way that road assistance gets calculated, and what a disadvantage it is to the western part of the state, where population is declining, because you've got a formula that rewards communities where population is growing. But just because your population is declining, and in fact, because your population is declining, you have less money available to do any of the things that your citizens expect.
Right.
So we were looking at that, and we were looking at roads, and then that took us to look at municipal buildings, and we saw. We started looking just at rural areas and the needs for municipal building improvements and the inability of cities and towns to pay for them in Western Mass, and then soon realized that the problem of paying for municipal buildings was a statewide problem, just as you suggested. But that report, did, I think, put really some emphasis on this problem that you had identified, you and some of your colleagues had already identified, and it brought more people together to say, yeah, you know what, and this is a good time to start addressing this problem, because we have federal money that has been made available both through the American Rescue Plan, but then also for the infrastructure bill. It's just a unique opportunity to to seed, if you will, to start the funding for some of these capital improvements for cities and towns who are faced with $40,000, $60,000 for a fire station. And as you well know, these costs, and that's just in a suburb. When you talk about a central fire station in a city like Lowell, you've got to be talking closer to $100 million.
Yeah.
So thankfully, I think that report has put some more emphasis behind that, and like you, I'm very hopeful that the Senate will be putting out a bill that will, at least on the public safety side of municipal infrastructure, be putting that, advancing the creation of an authority to help fund those local projects.
Your office has won a lot of national awards for its work. And what work has your office done that's allowed you to get those rewards?
We've put a real emphasis on professional training in the office. When I took over, the office has always done good work, but one of the things we're supposed to do is do work that meets standards that are set by the federal government, by the Government Accountability Office. And I took office and I found we weren't. Our staff wasn't sufficiently well trained. We didn't have sufficient data analysis, information technology tools to allow us to do more sophisticated work. So investing in technology, investing in the staff, strict adherence to the rules that govern how you conduct an audit really has helped. Those rules are in place not just to make sure that you dot every I and cross every T, but that you can be sure that the audit has been done independently and also objectively. And it's that objectivity that you present that gives the audits credibility, that gives them depth, because you're looking, objectivity means you don't look at just the information that fits your preconceived notion about what is going wrong in an agency. You look at all of the information, whether it's favorable or unfavorable to the premise that you established when you started that audit, and it allows you to even go more deeply, because you keep asking the next level of questions when you're doing the audit work that gives the audit more depth and sometimes breadth as well, and really allows you to innovate. And it's that kind of innovation and willingness to follow the data, the information, wherever it goes, that produces impactful audits that have caught the attention of several different national organizations.
We're just about running out of time, but I know that you're closing out or finishing out your third term in office, and I just want to say that I think you should be very proud of the work you've done during your tenure as a state auditor. We in Massachusetts have been very lucky to have you in that post for that time, and I think a lot of people will miss you when you're gone.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to miss the work, but another 4 years. As much as I love it, 12 years, I think it's time to let someone else have a shot at it.
Okay. All right, well, listen, thank you very much.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure. This goes by so fast.
It does go by fast.
Thank you,
yes.
though.
All right, thank you. All right, well, State Auditor Suzanne Bump, thank you very much for being my guest today, and that's it for another edition of the Beacon Hill Buzz. Until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you during the next time. Thank you.